hope I.
Okay,
I
how
hope
y'all
I'm not
doing?
washed off. Do I look like I'm in heaven?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great. I love
Yeah.
it. I'm here for it.
I need to put a background. I look like I'm floating.
With the Healing Paradigm logo like right at your head. Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize that we're a little late. We had a little technical difficulties, but today we are talking about Black genius with my colleagues and sister friends. Hey, it's Courtney Justy. Is it Courtney Justy? I think it is. Hey, Courtney. But with my sister friends, Nozibele Kuumba. Um, I was trying to get all your names in. What am I
That's
missing?
fine.
Insabu.
I don't even know. I'll answer to anything these days.
Antoinette Waithe, who is an anthropologist. She's the owner of Grand Trusted Hair Products. And she is just an all around like good sister. And you
Oh,
know
thank
what I
you.
never give you credit for? I
What?
never give her credit for like completely saving my life when my children were young. She homeschooled my children for 4 years. I mean, and that is a no joke commitment. So I just need to say that publicly. Like, thank you for that
Oh,
because I don't know what I would have done without you. So thank you.
you are more than welcome.
And then also my other sister friend, one of my newest sister friends is Reverend Estee Nena Dillard. Okunsade. She is a Olokun priestess, and I always try to put her in a different category because it's a different water divinity.
You do. I love Yaya Osho. It's okay.
And she is also a queer sexologist. She's a reverend, and she's just an all-around good sister in terms of just the work that she does. But then also, she just has a beautiful spirit. And so, we're gonna have this discussion today on Black genius. We're missing some of our other sister friends just for a variety of reasons, some last-minute reasons, and some already kind of foreseen reasons. And one of the things I actually want to just acknowledge before we jump in, because we are missing one of our sister friends, is that Baba, Dr. Matulu Shakur, just made his transition last night. And so, for those of you that know him and know about his struggle and the fact that he just recently came home, to be able to kind of make that transition, we know that this is a significant moment. So, we want to send him some light as he transitions to the realm of the ancestors. So, that being said, let's shift gears. And I want to start with you, Nozibele, because you were the one that actually came up with this topic and thought it was important for us to talk about Black genius and like from our different kind of perspectives, the way that we view the world. So why don't you just jump in and start us off in this topic?
Yeah, I know with this topic, we're always talking about um, all the things, all the creative things that African people do. And I think that it was inspired by a conversation that I was having with someone about how um, a lot of the things that African American people come up, people use it and monetize it in other cultures, right? And that's not to say that other cultures are not creative, but just like they used to say back in the day, um, Bronx keep making it, Brooklyn keep faking it, and Manhattan keeps taking it, in terms of the rap. So when we look at the creativity, according to some anthropologists, creativity is the answer to social and psychological problems, right?
Huh.
Creativity also comes up because of, in some cases, not all cases, but in some cases, due to not only oppression, but when you lack something. And we have to think about this in terms of African people, especially African Americans, that when we were here, we had to make do with a lot of things. So we became very creative. We became creative in terms of the way that we cooked food. We became creative in the way that we talked to one another. We became creative to the way that in the ways that we expressed ourselves. And that creativity is one of the things that we call productivity. that we're always producing these new ways to express ourselves. And I always think that for me, that is just like very, very amazing. And I want to throw in a little plug here. I don't know if you all had a chance to see the movie The Blackening.
I haven't seen it. You told me about it.
That movie, I think if we were to talk about African creativity, we would have to really consider that movie, because that movie was creative. It talked about how African people were inventive and the geniusness of the whole thing. So yeah, so that's just my opening statements. I don't want to keep on rambling on and give somebody else a chance to say something, but I do want to know that, let us know that I'm going to want to talk about creativity in the areas of the big C in terms of culture, the literature, the art, the music, and the little c in terms of how African people, the social norms and mores. So,
Okay,
yeah.
so just I'm gonna let you go, Estee. But when you said that, and I was like, oh, I thought psychologists only saw it that way. So when you say anthropologists see creativity as like an answer to like social justice issues, and then for psychological concerns, I'm like, oh, like y'all see that too? Oh, okay.
Girl, anthropologists steal things from everybody. We're an insecure bunch. We got a little bit of everything
Nah,
here.
I didn't say all that. I didn't say just officially, y'all. I didn't say that.
I'm just saying, we still stuff about. We have psychology, history, everything is up.
Okay, now you freezing for a second. See, you were doing good, Nozibele. Now you froze. But while she's figuring that out, Estee, do me a favor and jump in just in terms of creativity. Now we know it's all kinds of creativity when you talk about spirituality in the Black church, but anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I think from a spiritual perspective, we really see creativity as being a demonstration of your gift, right? So we all believe that we have gifts. I think that's pretty standard across African practices. So from, ATRs, African traditional religions, these gifts manifest more like particular roles and how those roles contribute to the practice. And so you kind of know the people who serve in different capacities as a part of the community and a ritual practice. I think when we think about kind of broader communities, in more ancient terms, we have things like hearing rituals. We have things where we can see ancient African practices that took time to listen to spirit, to walk with ancestors, to understand what children were bringing to the community, and then initiating them into those gifts and allowing them to hone those skills as they age into adults, right? I think on this land, the Christian perspective around gifts and the body of Christ having many components that all make up the physical body and needing all of those gifts to get the whole picture lends itself very much so in literal ways for Black folks. And so we practice that even when we don't name it. So that creativity shows up when, we know who has permission to cook what. We know who has permission to bring what to the cookout, right? We know
the potato salad. Everybody can't do the.
Yeah. And we need somebody who can bring the paper plates and the cups.
Right. And that's usually the person that can't cook.
That's the person that can't cook. But that's
why they can cook, but you don't trust they cooking. So but that's the whole story.
They have nasty. Ashe. Now that's a little different, I think. But I think that kind of conversation and the comfort with it is our awareness of gifts and roles that come out of those gifts, right? So things like, okay, probably the person who brings the chips in the cup, they're the resourceful person. So cooking ain't never been their thing, but they're the person that knows how to do the budget. They're gonna not have a problem going to get the roasted. They're gonna be efficient. They're gonna be able to run grandma to the store. They know what store she like and how to get there, and what Walmart is on the way to be able to get the other things that we need, right? And so these things all take up space, because if your uncle doesn't cut the grass, if your brother doesn't run to the liquor store, if somebody doesn't go get the cooler and fill it up with ice, right? All of these components don't kind of come together. And we very much so see that in Black church practices and communal practices, which are spiritual spaces for us. We see that in communal gathering, in the way that we gather, in the ways that we kind of situate ourselves around each other. So I really think our creativity tends to flow spiritually out of our gifts, out of our awareness of our gifts, and out of our clarity that skills and talents are an extension of the gifts with which we came to offer the community.
One other thing. Oh, go ahead, Nozibele.
And I think that's interesting that you would say that, Estee, because one of the things that I think her name was Quan Letty was talking about in terms of culture, in terms of creativity, she was stating that creativity is cultural bound, right? That creativity is expressed uniquely through your culture. And in addition to that, the more communal you are, the more opportunities you have for an expressive culture, right? So people engage in creativity in different ways, right? You have some cultures that may be a little bit more individualistic, and a lot of the creativity is usually tied to socioeconomic factors for advancement. So we think about how people talk about Google. Google is so creative because they don't have walls and they let you take naps, all of those types of things. But that creativity is used to, is tied to economic and, development and capitalism. Whereas people who, and go ahead.
I said exploitation. Go ahead.
And exploitation, right? And in some cases. So when you have collective creativity, right, or creativity that comes out of collectivism, it is something that is, I think is easier to spread, and I think that's one of the reasons why African American culture and African culture is being adapted by so many people in so many different ways.
So one of the things that I saw, so y'all don't laugh at me. So I'm being vulnerable here and sharing something. So remember, I tell y'all all the time, I was not raised in a church. And so as an adult, when I've been invited to like church functions with friends, the thing that I've always found interesting is the choir. So I remember going to the Shrine of the Black Madonna one time and listening to the choir. They have an amazing choir if you've never heard it. And they took one line. It was like a few words, one line, and sang this song for about 10 minutes. And and I knew the choir director because we went to school together. And I remember asking her about it. I was like, that's an amazing song. And she was like, yeah, it's just one line. And we just kind of like, the creativity just flows like in the moment. And so they're like kind of, I don't want to kind of dishonor it. For me, the word I would say is ad-libbing. They just add extra parts to it. I was like, dang. And I just hadn't seen that before because I didn't grow up in a space and where that would occur. And so as I'm talking to her, and she's just like, yeah, that's just what you do in church. It's like you might just take, this line that you hear and then you create a whole song out of it. And I was like, our folks are some geniuses.
And that's and I think that's just like amazing. It goes back when I talk about language. I always use this clip from the Bamboozled, the Spike Lee movie. And I don't know if y'all remember the part Mos Def came in and he was upset about something. And they had a whole 5-minute dialogue with the words, you know what I mean, you see what I'm saying. And so he came in and he was like, oh, man, you know what I mean? They was like, yeah, man, I know what you mean. See what I'm saying? Know what I'm saying? See what I'm And they did a whole thing.
I don't remember that. I have to watch the movie.
You have to watch it. It is the only words they said, know what I mean. And then it was like, not what I mean. See what I'm saying? And the white guy that was there, he was just lost and he didn't know. And the reason why I mentioned the blackening, because they had this part in the movie where they were communicating with their looks. And you know, as women, we do that all the time. It's like you're doing right now. I know what you mean. So you're talking to somebody and you can have a whole conversation based on looks. So I think that's amazing. They take one line, they take one thing, and we just run with it. And I think that is a beautiful thing. So if y'all get a chance, go look at that. It is so funny.
I gotta go back and I haven't seen. I think I saw it one time when it first came out, so I haven't seen it. I use that example, and I may have shared it with you all a while ago, but I use it when I'm training folks on assessment, and I'll talk a little bit about that, how this genius, Black genius, comes in psychological assessment. But I show people this chart that has like 7 different ways to interpret you good. And they're like, that is so true. Because it's like, you good. Are you okay? Are you all right? Is there a problem? No problem. Thank you. Like all these ways.
We can have a problem. You good?
Yeah. And I just say, yeah. So we have all of these ways that we communicate, and it is so natural to us that and creative that we don't even necessarily realize until someone says, what do you mean? And I've been in spaces with colleagues. I remember one time, so you know, we all code switch. So we have our language that we speak as African Americans to each other, and then we switch into standard English when we're talking to other folks in the community. I remember one time sitting in a consultation group that is ethnically mixed, African Americans and European Americans. And this is with my old supervisor, and she's European American. And we're all comfortable with each other and could say stuff. And I remember saying something, and I was describing something, and I'm just comfortable with them. So I'm not going to code switch with them. I'm using AAV. So I'm just using African American vernacular English. And my old supervisor, cool white woman, she was like, what does that mean? And I couldn't figure out how to translate that, because I was just saying what it was. So I turned to the other Black psychologist in the room, and I was like, can you explain that? And so she translated it for me. And she and I had never talked about that, but I just knew that she was automatically going to know what it was that I was saying. And I can't even remember what I said, but I remember having that moment, and I was just like, the whole example of creativity is that we show up in spaces and we will create. We have our own culture, our own language, and even people that we interact with all the time will not understand because they're not part of that culture.
Yeah, and that's what's so amazing to me, because you can go out and, you know, a Black person that you've never known, not only will you communicate, because I remember I was somewhere and I saw someone come out of a bathroom with a sandwich and a public restroom and a cup. And it was, you know, it was a single restroom, so you had to wait. And the other sister that was behind me was like, and you know, we had the whole conversation, like, what in the world? That's nasty. You know, the whole thing that we had the conversation. But the thing about our Africanness, and the beautiful part about our Africanness, is that it shows and presents itself throughout everything. That whole thing about cultural continuities is a very real thing, right? So, for example, in the area of AAVE, that our whole worldview is still attached to the language, right? So they have this thing called Saphir-Whorf hypothesis, is that your language expresses your view of the world. And for African Americans, we see the world in a circle, right? We see it as a continuum. That's why we can talk about ancestors. And I'm sure Estee will get some more into this later. We can talk about the ancestors as if they're still here, right? We can talk about children like they are here, unborn children like they're here, because we see, and other people of color see, the world as a circle, right? And that is expressed in the African American language like the continuous B. Like I be going to the store, I be doing this, so I be doing that, and because it is a continuous thing, right? And even children understands this. I know Jonathan Gales did a documentary about language, and I don't know if y'all heard about this. The psychologist showed the children a picture, and she used this, asked who be eating cookies. And she had a picture of Cookie Monster in the bed, and he was sick. Then she had a picture of Big Bird eating cookies, and she was like, "So who be eating cookies?" And then all the children said, Cookie Monster be eating cookies. He don't have any cookies now because he's sick, but he be eating cookies because he always eats cookies, right? So they understood that, like he be eating cookies all the time. So I think that it's just like brilliant in terms of how our culture is so productive that we can come up with these creative ways to express ourselves. I mean, it's a genius in that when you think about all the things that they try to take away from us culturally, all the ways that they try to suppress who we are, it still manifested itself time and time and time again in everything that we do. In jazz, the movements is there, the instruments that we use is there. The African genius comes through all the time through everything.
And what I think is interesting about that is, let's talk about how we measure it. Because you're saying, like, okay, this African genius is there, I mean, whether it be in spirituality, whether it be like culturally, with music. But when it comes to the field of psychology, y'all know that I'm part of this field that has a history of racism from a Western perspective. The measuring of genius is only in a particular area. And so what we are measuring, like when people talk about IQ tests, so I'm sure y'all heard folks, talk about like somebody having a high IQ and, being part of Mensa and stuff. What they're talking about is really exposure to Western education. So we should just throw out the term IQ, because that's what it is. It's exposure to Western education, Western thinking, Western concepts that are particularly focused on a couple of areas. One is your verbal knowledge, so your command of standard English and exposure to kind of Western ideas and Western concepts. Your nonverbal knowledge and how you can process that. And what we see is, like, oftentimes people of African descent actually have a higher nonverbal knowledge than they will have a verbal knowledge, which makes sense. It's also your processing speed, how fast you can take in information and then do something with that information, and then your memory. But the things that are weighted the heaviest are the verbal and that nonverbal knowledge. And so you actually take kind of 4 of those categories and put them together, and that's how they come up, or that's how we come up with IQ, because I do IQ testing. And historically, what we know that kind of the IQ testing, the way that it is now, has come out. It came out of France. So the big IQ test that was introduced into the United States is in Stanford Binet, and they were using that to be able to, in France, to decide who were the people that should go to school, like to go to like kind of public accessible school, and then the folks that were have an intellectual disability, and so then they shouldn't go to public school. And that was brought here as part of kind of the eugenics movement. And so you saw this kind of broad exposure to lots of folks. So it was not only people that had intellectual disabilities, but also people of color, predominantly African Americans. And part of that eugenics movement is to say these people weren't smart. And it wasn't that our people aren't smart, it's that we don't have this access and exposure to this Western education. Now, when we kind of look forward, things are a little bit different. So sometimes, and I kind of want to just put this out there, and then I'll stop and let y'all go. Sometimes what I notice that people do now when they think about IQ is that they still have that same argument that, okay, IQ is problematic because it's racist. I mean, it has absolutely historically been racist. There's a lot of racism that you can still see in it, but the argument has changed because, one, Stanford Binet is not the primary IQ test anymore. That's number one. But number two, they've normed it differently. So it doesn't have the same problems. It has problems, but it doesn't have the same problems. And then three, there's lots of other IQ assessments that people give now. So we don't even give the Stanford Binet in our office. We give other ones that can still be problematic, and it can be problematic for different reasons. And that, remember that that's only capturing one aspect of IQ. We are not measuring someone's musical genius through that. We are not measuring their ability to create, to take one word and have 7 different meanings and be able to communicate those meanings to a complete stranger. That's brilliant, and we don't measure any of that.
That makes me think about, I don't know if you all remember, this was like maybe about a year ago when it went viral, all the acronyms of famous or popular African-American sayings. And so people would be, oh, did y'all miss that? It was big on social media. So people would like be on social media just typing letters, right? And then folks would be under the post laughing like, my mama said it all the time, right? You know, and it would just be popular African American sayings, you know, you look just like your daddy.
Oh, no, I missed all of that, but yeah.
But it would just be the first letter of all the words, you know. And there are actually games, like household games, that have been made from that social media popularity that I don't remember how it started, but of people talking about the ability to just give an acronym, and that saying being so pervasive in African American culture that you can look at the letters and know, you know, and some of them could be long, right? and know what this statement was. And so like that is a measure of like the ability, the creativity to use, manipulate, create, apply language with innovation.
And I think about it in terms of, I mean, these are things that I obviously can't say, but because we do so much around like measuring IQ and these things, because I primarily focus on assessment in my practice. When I'm out in the world, I'm not turned on as a psychologist, but I'm not turned off. And so I do notice things. And one of the things that really stands out to me is when it comes to creativity in terms of music. So there is, I've seen this happen a number of times where I can tell by seeing the person or interacting with the person that in terms of Western knowledge, they would be considered as having an intellectual disability. So they would probably be in special education courses. But when it comes to drumming or being able to play an instrument, complete genius.
And that makes me think of Basquiat. And I'm just like really, really hurt because his style is being co-opted everywhere
I see it a
by
lot. Yeah.
everyone. Yeah, and I know we went to an art gallery opening about 2 weeks ago, and one of the artists there, his style was exactly like it. And I was like, okay, so, and you know, he was like, I never saw his work before, and I just came up with that. And I was like, no, that's very distinctive. And the thing about Basquiat and why I think that his work is so powerful and so
Wait, Nozibele,
lasting.
you gotta explain who Basquiat is. So we're like, yes, because we know who
Oh,
he is. You gotta say who he is, just in case people don't know who he is.
okay. He was a
Or was.
popular visual artist back in the 80s. He was friends with Andy Warhol, who was a favorite pop artist, famous pop artist. He was of Haitian descent. And because of that, and that's what I'm pulling into now in terms of Basquiat, is that he put a lot of religious symbolism and a lot of Haitian voodoo inside of his work. And people don't look at it. If you are trained in African spirituality, you can pick, oh, that's Baron Samedi right there. that Shango right there. You can look at his work and pick out those elements. And it's not that he's just doing a crown. It's not that he's just doing these faces, but he is doing a mixture of his cultural, he's expressing himself culturally and spiritually through his art. Right. So he is, if you have a chance, look him up. And like I said, he was around during the 1980s. I think he passed away of AIDS, maybe like around 85, 86.
That's
I'm
early.
not sure. Yeah. And he had like a very, very short career. But the thing about Basquiat is that he was really a creative genius because he did everything. People talk about his artwork, but he was a fashion designer. He was a poet. He was a musician. You know, he had a band. You know, he was doing all of these things to express himself, creativity, but people just focus on his artwork.
He died in 88.
88, thanks. Yeah, I know it's in the 80s. And another person that, if we were talking about people back during that time, I don't know, because I was really into fashion design, was Willie Smith. And he was a fashion designer back in the 80s. He was the one who popularized streetwear. Because before he did that, high-end fashion designers, they really weren't trying to do streetwear. They just did couture, or they did stuff, you know, midline. But he was the fashion designer that came out and did streetwear. So, yeah, I think that is the genius is just amazing.
Yeah, I just put his information so if people are interested in Basquiat. Yeah, I heard about him because there was, I think you and I were talking about this when there's a painting that was discovered of his, and they were trying to figure out whether or not it was authentic or if it was a forgery. But yeah,
And it was a forgery.
and his artwork, his style is so distinctive. So if you talking about you ain't never seen it and you coming up with that stuff, no, you didn't. Stop telling that lie.
And the thing about Basquiat is that he is so powerful, because I was looking at it and I was like, has anybody really come up and did anything creative like that since him? You know, you've had some, you know, really, really good African American and African artists. But in terms of his style and his visual presentation, I mean, I can't think of anyone who's just been out of the box. Like he was just out there of the box. So yeah.
And you'll probably disagree with this. I would say I think you can think about Kehinde Wiley, just the way that he thinks about art.
I don't disagree with that.
Why you say that?
Well, I think that his style is very distinctive in a similar way. I think his approach reminds me of Basquiat in that way. But I think that the difference is time and context, right? So I think the time and context lends itself to a different level of genius because of access, because of education. Like, so I think that those things, I wouldn't say it's the same, but I would put them in conversation with each other. Yeah.
No, I can see that because I think that Kehinde comes at a time when people are more open. When Basquiat is doing his work, he's really pushing boundaries in the 80s when he's doing this stuff. But Kehinde, I mean, I got a credit card, American Express credit card. It's designed by Kehinde Wiley. I mean, in the 80s, that wasn't gonna happen.
And then I think you have to think about the creative person too, because Basquiat, he wasn't trying to do that. He was just trying to create art for himself. He just had an expression, and he had something that, you know, according to the documentaries and the things that I've looked at about him, he had that in him. And Estee, you can, I would like you to chime in because I would like to hear your take on it too. I think that he had something spiritual and something that was really powerful inside him that he needed to express. Because in the beginning, he was a graffiti artist. He was putting his images on the wall just because, you know, he started out being same old because, you know, all of the oppression. And this, again, it goes back to people of color being oppressed, because he was in New York, during that time, it was really, really horrible living conditions. New York was almost bankrupt. All these things were happening in the great state, or in the great city of New York. And so he was doing a lot of social commentary in the form of graffiti. And his name was Samo. He was like, and people was like, why you have the Samo? White people didn't understand, but the African people understood that this is the same old stuff that's been happening time and time again. It's the same old stuff, right? And so, he had this thing to be creative. And I think other artists too, they have that desire to be creative. They have that drive to be creative. Because as we said, creativity sometimes is culture bound, is very practical, is very pragmatic, is very innovative. Creativity comes from, in some cases, a severe case of lack, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that what makes him a little bit different. But Estee, what would be your take on it? And not just Basquiat, but in terms of creativity that comes from spiritual inspiration.
Okay, I first want y'all to clarify this pronunciation, because I've always been taught that it was Basquiat, and that's how I've seen it. Do we know? Is it?
Yeah, it's Basquiat. He's French, and so he's from. Well, he's not French. He's Haitian.
I was gonna say, I thought he was Haitian. Okay.
Yeah, he's Haitian, and because Haitian speaks French and a form of French, you don't pronounce the T, or the N. So a lot of people say Basquiat, but is Basquiat, the French pronunciation.
Thank you. I was like, let's teach us all, because even when I found out about him because of Jay-Z, I'm gonna just be honest, years ago, because I was 3 in '88. What you about to say? Say it. You off mute.
Go.
That's how I found out about the man. So
we had 3 in '88.
I was. Yeah, I was. I mean, anyway. So I didn't know the man existed, and because culturally, he's become more relevant. Like his art is being put on clothes and a part of different high end couture thing. So I became familiar with him in my adulthood because of that. So looking it up, even it says that the correct pronunciation is Basquiat, which is why I was like, let me ask, because I don't speak not a lick of French. But to answer your question, and I just thought it might be helpful for not just me, which is why I was like, let me ask this publicly, because that's helpful to understand from the Anthropologist. But I think there are a couple things going on. So Basquiat was bisexual. He was known to be bisexual, and his last partner was a woman. I think that was his partner when he transitioned. But he was known to be bisexual. So it actually reminds me of the concept that the Dillard have around the gatekeepers. And in Dillard tradition, which is a ancient African lineage, the Dillard see those who are sexually fluid in particular, while they had descriptions and articulations of folks who were across the spectrum of straight to gay, of gender one way or the other, and many ways in between, particularly the people that were in the middle, that had fluidity around gender expression and fluidity around sexual attraction and sexual behavior. They were seen to have unique spiritual gifts that gave them particular vision, and that vision was seen as the window, almost kind of like Eshu-like, and how we might think of him in a more popular way, kind of the window into the community. So that vision that was unique to the gatekeepers opened the door or closed it for those who were able to enter the Dillard communities. And that had an application communally in a very physical way, because they would be the ones at the exterior of the community. But it also had a spiritual component of their ability to vision and envision on behalf of the community. And so I've always kind of thought about him in that way. knowing that part of him, which is public knowledge, and thinking about how different his approach was, and at a time when there really wasn't space for it to be celebrated, or even a space for it to be rightfully honored or consumed, because he didn't die a rich man who was selling his art. You know what I'm saying? Like, he died,
His estate is making money, not him.
His estate is making money.
And I think his estate is people that don't look like him.
Really?
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I
He go ahead and finish your thought, because he didn't have any children. He was estranged
No.
from his family. He was actually homeless. So at the time that he passed away, and so who is managing his estate? And that comes back to creativity being capitalized, right? And he was very popular in the New York art scene. He was up there for people who are in fine art, visual art. His name was up there with Andy Warhol. But you don't see, and well, you do see like a lot of Andy Warhol stuff on commercial stuff, because he meant to do that, right? But he was a vanguard of his time. But go ahead, Estee, I'm sorry.
I don't remember. That's upset me. But I think my point was just that his excuse me, his unique articulation of his vision, for me, spiritually, reminds me of that gift, of the gift to see in open worlds, to stand at the crossroads, spiritually, creatively, on behalf of the community, and to be able to codify what that vision is, through whatever mediums we have. So that's how I see Basquiat.
I wonder. So as I'm thinking about that, I was having this conversation with a brother last week, and I was talking about the fact that all of us have gifts. All of us have creative gifts, whether you believe it's that God gave them to you, or you picked the gifts before you came. However, your spiritual formation allows you to be able to think of that we all have gifts. And I remember him responding as that was like a unique concept, that he didn't perceive himself as having a specific gift. And just thinking about that conversation now, I'm just like thinking about how many people of African descent now don't perceive themselves as having gifts, because we're kind of in this, everyday kind of role of just producing for other people and creating wealth for other people and in their lineage, but not necessarily having that time to hone what it is that is spiritually given to us. And so where some people start to think that they don't even necessarily have gifts, like he literally didn't think that he had a gift. And think about the psychological impact of that. Like, if you don't know, like, so I know if nothing else, in terms of cooking. Now, I'm not the best cook on the earth,
Girl.
But I know that in terms of cooking, there's a way that stuff comes through me ancestrally that I know that that's a gift. That is nothing but spirit. And I just can't imagine walking on this earth and just producing, but not realizing that you have this connection to spirit.
Right. Because I think that that's another way that we can look at creativity, right? We can say creativity and genius is a spiritual thing. We can look at it in the way that, and this is what I was thinking in terms of the ancestor guiding us and having access to a different area of knowledge. So I think not only is creativity cultural bound, but it's spiritually bound too. So if your creativity and your genius is connected to culture and your spirituality, then it's understandable why some people or some groups may not be as creative as others, and why some groups would have to basically um, uh, kind of like take, over some of the
Co-op.
things that people do, you know.
Mhm. Estee
I'm
said,
trying to think of ways to say it. Yeah, co-op, and I'm trying to think of a good way to say it, but
I
definitely,
feel like that's
you
better than
know,
what I was thinking.
yeah, that's better than what I was thinking. No more edits, no more edits. So,
Yeah. Co-op.
so yeah, so they co-opt a lot of things, and you'll look and you'll be like, what? And because they don't have the connection to it, the translation is always different. Because, we think about it in terms of food. I was reading an article. I think it was also the Lady article when they talked about how African American women had to do their hair when we were enslaved over here,
mhm.
right? Because they didn't, we didn't have the things that we were used to. And they would get us, originally, they would get the cording brush that they use, those hard brushes that they use on sheep with all the metal spikes. Then they would try to do that with African American women hair. And then it was like, oh no, you can't do that for us. So African American women started combing they started using forks, they
Mhm.
started using twigs, they made their own brushes, right? And then they talked about even back in the 50s, because they didn't have access to stores in rural areas, how they would use paper bags to roll their hair.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, so that translated, because I know I wasn't born in the 50s, but my mom, because she was like, I was like, oh, I ran out of rollers. She was like, girl, take this paper bag. Ain't nobody going out to the store. Take that paper bag and roll up your perm and you good to go. And it worked.
It does work.
It works. So that creativity, that way that genius that we have to say, okay, so I have um, a bag of beans,
Mhm.
and all I have left over is the entrails from this hog. I'm
Mhm.
going to take this out. I'm going to cut it up. I'm going to call it chitlins.
Mhm.
And I'm going to put these beans, and everything is going to be good. I mean, that's just like
That's creative genius.
crazy.
So in my conception of this, now this is Estee, Nena, Dillard. I'm not saying this is right. I'm not saying that even for me, I don't relegate it only to this, but I think about ancestral wisdom as inspiration for innovation more than I think about it as creativity. I generally think about our creativity, while certainly it's connected to our like, because for me that's inextricably linked, right? Like I can't be
Mhm.
separated from that.
Mhm.
But I think about my creativity more coming out of my own spirit and my own connection with source, God, universe, power, right? And I'm saying like ultimate reality, right? Like this kind of, yes, these are the things that I agreed to before I came, that I have a particular capacity to be able to conceive and imagine and to be able to bring into the physical realm. But my ability to innovate around that thing,
Mhm,
to me, is the ancestral part, right?
mhm,
And I think that's one way of thinking about it, but that's kind of how I generally think about it.
Okay.
So I think about like our ability to a good brother gave me this some years ago, Afro engineer,
I love that. Afro engineer.
right? So it's like I may have the creative vision, right? That
mhm,
again, of course, is not in isolation or in a
mhm,
silo, but I may have this particular creative vision that may come out of my own
mhm,
but how I figure out how to Afro engineer that thing, to me, that's all ancestral, right? So how do we go from there has to be a better way to do this to the cotton gin? I think that's ancestral. How do we get from twigs to the hot comb? That for me is ancestral. That those things work together.
And Nozibele, I'm gonna let you have the last word because we do have to stop on time today. I guess, and I never thought about it until you said it. Is I think about it maybe in the other
Direction.
direction, but I don't even know that it matters
It doesn't.
because I I was cooking one day and I was like, let me take sorrel. Now, I didn't grow up drinking, so I'm not Caribbean. I don't have no Caribbean ancestry that I know of. And so I was like, I wonder what would happen if I take this sorrel and reduce it down and make it into a sauce. So don't ask me where that came from. That's the creativity. Now, I don't know nothing about reducing no darn sauce down or nothing. So then the ancestral piece comes in and says, okay, well, add this. And
that's the same thing I'm saying, because I'm saying the concept. But no, I think that's the same order, because I'm saying conceptually, you were like, what's gonna happen with sorrel, right? So I'm saying that's your Ori. But like, let me get the sorrel. But it's the ancestors that's like, yep, baby, make it a sauce and add this, and this. No, we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was the bomb, by the way. I was like, what? And then I found out like later that like
that was a thing.
Yeah, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
Ancestors.
Yeah. That's why I'm like, it's not separate from, but we do have the ability to access that creative power in our own consciousness, in our own spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. I agree. But I guess one of the parting things that I would like all of us to see or think about, because all too often we hear negative things about African people, just people in general in the press. And just like you said earlier, Ifetayo, sometimes we forget that we are magical, we are creative, and that we are geniuses in our own right. And we need to celebrate that more. If you are a single mom trying to figure out a way to feed your children with some beans and some rice in your cabinet, that's genius right there. Because you are innovative, you're creative, and you find another way to feed your family. If you are trying to come up with a way to express yourself visually, and you incorporate graffiti as well as some of the Haitian voodoo spirits that you have, that's genius, right? If you are, somebody who's trying to figure out a way that clothes will be better, or a way that you can design clothes for women and men without it being exploitative and uncomfortable, that's creative. That's genius, right? If you can know what I mean, see what I'm saying, for a whole 5 minutes, that's genius, right? And we need to celebrate the genius that we have as African people, and all the people that are on here now. And before you all go, because Ife, you just said that you had genius with the sauce. Estee,
I didn't say that. I didn't call it genius. I just said it's the ancestors.
I know. I'm claiming genius. That's what I'm saying. We need to start saying, okay, I was genius today at how I put this bomb outfit together. That's my genius. This outfit is bomb, right?
Okay.
And you look great today, by the way. Let me just say that. You look amazing.
Thank you. So we need to celebrate our genius. So, that was my last comment. So, Estee, how will you celebrate your genius? What did you do in your genius today? Besides that gala and looking fine as always.
Girl, thank you. So the what came to me while you were talking is my grandmother used to always say the first mind is the spirit. And so my takeaway from this wonderful conversation is to listen to yourself, listen to the things that come up, and don't ignore them, because that is our consciousness. That is our connection to source, to God, to spirit, that allows our own creativity to be birthed forth, and then to be further inspired and connected to the spirits that we walk with.
Ashe. Yay. I love it. I love it. And I will accept the idea of just like saying, allowing something to be said. Okay, I did something that was genius. So that sorrel sauce.
It was genius.
Oh, yeah. You got to tell me what you put it on.
I put it on salmon.
Oh. What?
The bomb. If y'all don't know, the bomb.
Oh, yeah.
Girl,
I'm coming over. Next weekend.
I'm telling you
that. So I've done two. I've done that twice. sorrel, and then I've done a balsamic reduction and put that on pizza. I'm telling you, that's some kind of eating that you...
Girl, you making me hungry now.
Anywho, that being said, y'all, thank you for hanging out with us. As always, do me a favor and press the like button, share for us. That's the way that people know that we are actually on, because, you know, even though we got 5,000 followers on the channel, people always say that they can't see us. And that's because Facebook has all kinds of fun ways of, you know, making it, you know, reducing your audience unless you pay. So that's one of the ways that you can help us. We are on vacation next month because one of the things that we understand is that rest is part of resistance in this work that we are doing. So we're on vacation in August, and we will see you back in September. And y'all help me thank my sister friends, Estee Nena Dillard, who's a queer sexologist. She's the owner of Endless Spiritual Consulting, and Nozibele Waithe, who is the owner of Grand Tressa, and she's the author and anthropologist. Y'all take care.
Bye, y'all.